You can expect inflation to begin heating up again as one of the major trucking companies in America has declared bankruptcy. After 100 years in business, Yellow Trucking has declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy with largely because they can't get along with the Teamsters Union. About 2/3 of their employees are Teamsters. The Teamsters just did a big contract with UPS with a lot more pay for the drivers, and they were trying over the last 9 months to get the same thing done with Yellow Trucking. The difference is Yellow Trucking has been struggling financially for quite a few years and couldn't afford to pay the freight to carry the Teamsters Union, to pay for the Central States pension fund, which got bailed out by the federal government in the last 2 years. But this company owed $50 million to it, couldn't afford it. The irony of all this is Yellow Trucking would have gone down during the pandemic, except for they were saved by the Trump administration, because the Trump administration realized that a company that runs about 9% of the freight nationwide and carries a great deal of freight for the Defense Department was essential to our national security, particularly at a time when the entire economy was collapsing. And so the Trump administration said, we're going to give you a couple of loans, one 300,000, other 400,000 approximately. They ended up owing about $720 million back to the federal government as a result. But those loans kept Yellow Freight, kept them alive for the 2.5 years subsequent from them being issued. Why is that important? It's important because when the entire economy was breaking down, you couldn't lose 10% of the freight carriers all in one fell swoop. You had to keep things rolling as much as possible as things weren't being shipped, as things weren't coming off the ports. And so those companies were getting killed. And the Trump administration's loan actually kept them alive for 2.5 years. Now, some people are trying to say, oh, that was a bad thing. The taxpayers are out the money. Listen, the taxpayers were out the money anyway. Okay, it was a big giveaway. We understand that. What was bad about it was that we sit there and we now know that about half of the debt of Yellow Trucking is owed to the federal government. So when they're declaring bankruptcy protection, they're really declaring bankruptcy protection against the federal taxpayer, at least for half that debt, which for all intents and purposes means that we, the taxpayers, drove them out of business by not just saying, okay, well, we're going to extend the loan, we're going to expand it, we're going to cut the interest rate, we're going to do something to make it so you can stay in business. Bottom line is, trucking is an essential component of our economy. Trucking takes things, fruits and vegetables and other things from our ports inland. It carries goods across the country from distributorships to warehouse, from warehouses to retailers. Every single thing we import basically comes on a truck to us from the ports. And secondly, when you're talking about from warehouse to retail or to a B2B transaction of business, most of that comes on trucks. And when you lose 10%, let's say 7.5%, 7.5% of your capacity, that's a big problem. Now, how does this affect inflation? Well, it affects it very simply. Yellow Trucking was the low-cost provider, meaning they were the floor cost. With them gone, the costs of trucking are by demand, by necessity, are going to go up. And without a competitor, a low-end cost competitor, the other trucking companies will obviously feel free to raise their rates, raise their costs because of supply and demand. So what do you get? We're going to get massively increased trucking costs for goods across this country. And that's going to mean the cost of your potatoes is going to be more. The cost of your fruits and vegetables, your fruits are going to be more. Is there a potato, a fruit, or a vegetable? I never could remember. I guess there's a root, but it's going to be that the cost of virtually everything that you have is going to end up being more at the retailer. Now you may say it may only go up a few cents, 50 cents, $1. But the fact of the matter is that's across virtually everything you're going to be purchasing. And when you start seeing the unemployment of the 30,000 people from Yellow Trucking who aren't going to be employed anymore, and you start seeing the waves of people who were dependent upon them at ports and elsewhere doing the same, you're going to find that there's nothing more than a disaster and awaiting, because this may just be the first of many. We talked about wage shocks and the price wage spiral in the past. Well, this is part of the price wage spiral. When you have prices going up, you have wages by necessity push up. And the businesses that cannot afford to pay the higher wages, in the case of Yellow, they were in danger of having a strike. They declared bankruptcy before that occurred. But the bottom line is they couldn't keep up with the salaries. And as a result, they're now a former company. And America is much poorer as a result. And end game, the Trump administration was right to keep Yellow Trucking going, and the Biden administration ignored the problem and didn't actually deal with their debt that was half their company debt in such a way that allowed this company to survive. And it would have been, and that was what was in America's interest, for this trucking company to be able to survive and hopefully thrive in the future. This is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government.